In this episode, we move into a part of artificial intelligence, AI, governance that often sounds less exciting than models, risk classifications, or legal obligations. But it turns out to be one of the biggest reasons governance programs succeed or fail. Many organizations focus first on tools, policies, and approvals, then later realize that people across the business are using the same words in different ways, making decisions from different assumptions, and carrying very different ideas about what responsible AI use actually means. That confusion creates trouble fast because governance depends on shared understanding before it can produce shared action. If leaders think AI strategy means growth, builders think it means model performance, users think it means convenience, and control teams think it means restrictions, the organization will struggle to make coherent decisions no matter how many documents it writes. Training, therefore, is not just a support activity on the side of governance. It is the way an organization teaches itself to speak clearly, think consistently, and act responsibly across many different roles that touch AI in very different ways. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful place to begin is terminology, because people cannot govern what they do not describe well. New learners sometimes assume terminology is just vocabulary memorization, but in governance it is much more practical than that. A term like model, system, output, training data, inference, risk, transparency, human oversight, or deployment can shape a decision differently depending on who is using it and what they think it means. If one team uses AI to describe any advanced software, while another uses it only for machine learning systems, they may apply different rules to similar tools without realizing it. If a business unit thinks a recommendation engine is merely an assistive feature, while a governance team sees it as a system influencing important decisions, their expectations about review and accountability will not match. Training on terminology matters because it creates the shared language that allows people to spot when they are aligned, when they are confused, and when they are actually disagreeing about substance rather than stumbling over words. That shared language should never be built only for technical experts. One of the biggest mistakes organizations make is assuming that if their developers and data scientists understand the terms, everyone else can simply rely on them. In practice, leaders, business owners, procurement teams, privacy professionals, legal staff, security teams, auditors, and everyday users all need enough AI vocabulary to understand the tools, ask sensible questions, and recognize when an issue deserves attention. They do not all need the same level of depth, but they do need enough clarity to avoid depending entirely on translation from someone else. A senior leader should be able to distinguish a low-risk productivity tool from a higher-stakes system affecting decisions about people. A procurement team should understand the difference between a vendor providing a model, a platform, or a complete managed service. A user should know whether the system is generating suggestions, producing decisions, or supporting a human reviewer. When terminology training reaches every stakeholder group at the right depth, governance becomes easier because the organization develops a more stable mental model of what it is actually using and why that use matters. Once a common language begins to take shape, strategy training becomes the next major need. Strategy in this context does not simply mean telling people that the company wants to use AI. It means helping stakeholders understand why the organization is using AI, what outcomes it is pursuing, what kinds of use are encouraged, what kinds require extra caution, and how AI fits into the broader goals of the business. Without strategy training, people tend to fill the gap with their own assumptions. Some may think the company wants maximum experimentation at any cost. Others may assume the company is mainly concerned with avoiding headlines and will discourage serious use. Still others may believe AI is only for technical teams, or only for productivity, or only for customer-facing work. Those assumptions pull behavior in different directions. Training on strategy gives people a coherent sense of direction so they know not only what AI can do, but also what the organization believes it should be used for, what boundaries matter, and what responsible success looks like. This matters because organizational strategy shapes the tone of governance. If the business wants thoughtful innovation, the training should help people understand how experimentation can happen responsibly rather than either recklessly or fearfully. If the business operates in a highly regulated or high-impact environment, the training should help people see why certain uses deserve more scrutiny and why slower, more deliberate deployment may be appropriate. If the organization is early in its AI maturity, the training may focus on shared concepts, acceptable use, and decision pathways. If the organization is more advanced, the training may include deeper role-based expectations and more detailed life cycle responsibilities. Strategy training is what connects the idea of governance to the actual posture of the organization. Without that connection, governance can feel abstract and disconnected from the work people are trying to do. With that connection, training becomes a bridge between business ambition and disciplined practice, which helps people understand that governance is not simply there to say no. It is there to help the organization pursue the right opportunities in the right way. Governance training itself should then explain how decisions are made, who owns what, when review is required, and how concerns are escalated. Many organizations tell people to use AI responsibly without ever teaching them what that means inside the company's actual operating model. A user may not know when a tool is approved for general productivity work versus when it needs extra review for sensitive data. A manager may not know whether they can introduce a new vendor tool on their own or whether procurement, security, privacy, and legal teams must be involved first. A technical team may understand the system's limitations but not know what documentation or approvals are required before deployment. Governance training fills those gaps by teaching the organization how responsibility works in practice. It shows people where the rules live, what workflows matter, what questions must be asked before adoption or expansion, and what signals indicate that something should be paused, escalated, or reconsidered. That kind of training makes governance actionable instead of merely aspirational. A strong program also recognizes that every stakeholder group needs training designed for its role rather than one giant presentation that treats everyone the same. Executives need to understand AI opportunity, risk appetite, accountability, and the types of questions they should ask when approving or overseeing use. Business leaders need guidance on use case selection, benefit justification, oversight expectations, and how to recognize when a seemingly simple tool carries higher stakes than it first appears. Technical teams need deeper training on life cycle responsibilities, system limitations, documentation, testing, monitoring, and how governance expectations connect to design and deployment choices. Control functions such as privacy, legal, security, compliance, and risk teams need enough technical and operational context to evaluate AI issues without treating every use case as identical. Everyday users need practical understanding of what the tools can and cannot be trusted to do, what data they should avoid entering when human review matters, and where to go when something seems wrong. Role-based training works because it respects the fact that governance is shared across the organization but not identical across every seat. Executive training deserves special attention because leadership signals shape the behavior of the whole organization. If executives only hear broad excitement about AI and never receive structured education on governance, they may unintentionally reward speed, scale, and novelty more than disciplined adoption. They may approve initiatives without asking about oversight, transparency, data use, vendor risk, or the burden placed on users and affected individuals. On the other hand, leaders who are trained well can set better expectations from the top. They learn how to ask whether the use case aligns with strategy, whether the organization understands the system's limits, whether the review process matched the level of risk, and whether post-deployment monitoring is strong enough to justify continued reliance. They also learn that governance is not only about legal exposure. It is about trust, operational quality, accountability, and whether the organization can use AI at scale without drifting into preventable harm. When leaders are trained properly, they help turn governance from a specialist concern into a visible organizational standard. Training for builders and technical teams is equally important, but it should not stop at abstract ethics language or generic reminders to be careful. People who design, configure, integrate, test, or maintain AI systems need to understand how governance shows up in the real decisions they make. That includes understanding how data choices shape outcomes, how deployment context changes risk, why documentation matters, how to communicate known limitations honestly, and how human oversight should be designed so it is meaningful rather than symbolic. Technical teams also benefit from training that helps them understand the language and concerns of non-technical stakeholders. When builders understand how privacy, fairness, transparency, and accountability questions are likely to arise, they are better positioned to design with those issues in mind instead of treating them as late-stage interruptions. This kind of training does not ask technical teams to become lawyers or policy specialists. It helps them build systems and workflows that are easier to govern because key concerns were anticipated rather than discovered only after the tool is already in use. Training for general users may be the most overlooked part of the whole picture, even though users often determine whether an AI tool becomes helpful, harmful, or quietly misused. Many organizations roll out tools broadly with little more than access instructions, as if basic familiarity with software is enough to guarantee safe use. In reality, users need role-appropriate guidance on what types of tasks the tool is suitable for, what kinds of data should not be entered, how to interpret uncertain or incomplete outputs, and when to rely on human judgment instead of automation. They also need to understand that fluent output is not the same as accurate output, and that convenience can create overtrust very quickly. User training should teach healthy skepticism without producing fear. The goal is not to make people afraid to use AI. It is to help them use it with judgment. When user education is neglected, organizations often discover that the largest governance problems come not from deliberate misconduct, but from ordinary employees making plausible mistakes because nobody clearly taught them where the boundaries were. Control functions also need their own training because their role is not simply to slow down adoption or search for problems in isolation. Privacy, legal, compliance, security, risk, audit, and procurement teams need enough grounding in AI concepts and deployment realities to ask the right questions and separate routine cases from more sensitive ones. A privacy professional needs to understand how model behavior, prompts, and outputs can create data issues beyond ordinary collection and storage concerns. A security team needs to understand how AI systems can expand attack surface, create data leakage pathways, or increase misuse risk. Procurement teams need to understand what vendor claims matter, what questions should be asked during acquisition, and where responsibility still remains with the deploying organization. Audit and compliance functions need to know what good evidence of governance looks like so they can assess process quality without turning review into box checking. Training these groups helps them become better governance partners because they can engage with AI use cases in a way that is informed, calibrated, and tied to actual organizational practice rather than generic caution. Another essential element is repetition. AI training cannot be treated as a one-time awareness campaign that happens during launch season and then fades into memory. The field evolves, tools change, new use cases appear, policies mature, and stakeholder expectations shift over time. A terminology guide that seemed clear 6 months ago may no longer cover new system types or new governance decisions the organization now faces. Strategy may become more ambitious, more cautious, or more refined as the business learns from early efforts. Governance pathways may change as review bodies mature or as incidents reveal where responsibilities were unclear. Effective training therefore needs refresh cycles, updates, and reinforcement. People need to hear key concepts more than once and in more than one format before those ideas change behavior. Repetition is not a sign that people are failing to learn. It is how organizations turn important concepts into habits. In fast-moving areas like AI, habits matter because decisions are often made under time pressure, and people fall back on what has been reinforced most clearly. Scenario-based teaching is often one of the best ways to make this training useful because it helps people connect abstract terms and policies to realistic decisions. A short example about a team wanting to summarize customer calls, screen job applicants, adopt a vendor chatbot, or analyze employee communications can reveal far more about stakeholder responsibilities than a slide full of definitions. Scenarios help executives practice asking better approval questions, help business leaders see how use case boundaries matter, help users recognize risky behavior, and help control teams understand how different concerns overlap in the same situation. They also make terminology easier to retain because people hear the words in context instead of as isolated labels. A scenario can show the difference between a model and a system, between a recommendation and a decision, between internal productivity use and higher stakes deployment, or between helpful oversight and performative oversight. Training becomes stronger when people can imagine themselves inside the decision rather than just listening to a lecture about principles. That kind of practical mental rehearsal is especially valuable for governance because so many important issues emerge from judgment calls, not from purely mechanical rules. Organizations should also think carefully about how they measure whether training is working. Completion alone is not enough. A person can sit through a course and still misunderstand what tools are approved, what data is restricted, or when escalation is required. Better measures look for signs that understanding has changed behavior. Are teams using terminology more consistently? Are business owners raising governance questions earlier? Are users showing better judgment about data entry and output review? Are procurement and vendor reviews more informed? Are incidents, misunderstandings, or policy violations decreasing? Are leaders asking stronger questions during approvals and oversight discussions? These signals help the organization see whether training is shaping culture rather than merely satisfying a requirement. Good measurement also helps identify where additional training is needed, because some stakeholder groups may understand strategy well, but still struggle with governance pathways, while others may know the policies, but not the terminology or the practical meaning of risk. The goal is not to create a perfect test score. The goal is to create better decisions throughout the organization. Over time, strong terminology, strategy, and governance training does something larger than improve individual knowledge. It helps create an organizational culture where AI is treated seriously without being treated mysteriously. People start to recognize that they are part of a shared system of responsibility rather than isolated users or reviewers acting alone. Leaders speak more clearly about purpose and boundaries. Builders understand why documentation and design choices matter beyond performance. Users become more thoughtful about trust and escalation. Control functions become more calibrated and constructive. That cultural effect is one of the deepest benefits of training because governance depends heavily on how people interpret signals, ask questions, and respond to ambiguity when no one is standing over them with a checklist. When an organization invests in role-based education that connects common language, strategic purpose, and operational governance, it becomes much more capable of handling new AI opportunities without starting from confusion each time. As you finish this lesson, the main idea to carry forward is that training is not separate from governance. It is one of the main ways governance becomes understandable and usable across the organization. Terminology training gives people a common language, strategy training gives them a shared sense of direction, and governance training shows them how decisions, responsibilities, and escalation actually work in practice. When those forms of education are tailored to executives, business leaders, technical teams, control functions, procurement staff, and everyday users, the organization becomes far more consistent in how it evaluates and uses AI. That consistency does not mean every person knows the same level of detail. It means every stakeholder knows enough to play their role responsibly, ask better questions, and recognize when something is moving beyond acceptable boundaries. In an area as fast-moving and consequential as AI, that kind of organizational understanding is not a nice extra. It is one of the strongest foundations responsible governance can have.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.